Hey, how's it going guys? My name is Dom and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be showing you how easy it is to create a to-do list using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Now, this project is perfect for beginners who want to learn how to use local storage in JavaScript as well as how to manage lists and update user interfaces. So this right here is going to be the final solution. I've got this list right here and you can do things such as check off items like that. You can also update an item. For example, I can say do some coding instead. That is going to save. If I was to refresh the page, it is also going to keep that list there. And I can also add a new item right down here. And of course, that's also going to work how you might expect it to. So let's head into VS Code right now and build this to-do list. So inside VS Code, I've got this set up. I've got this index.html as well as a linked up CSS style sheet and JavaScript file. I am using the defer attribute right here, which is why I'm able to put the JavaScript inside the head, and it is going to execute only once the page has finished loading. Beginning inside the body, let's create the HTML markup for this to-do list. The first element here is going to be a div with an ID of item. So this here is going to simply hold each of the items, which of course have a input field and a checkbox. Cool. The next element is going to be a button with an ID of add. And of course, this button is going to allow your user to, of course, click on it to add a new item to the to-do list. Okay, so if I save this right here and I go into the web browser, we can see we have something like this so far. So I just want to go back inside VS Code here and just include a sample item within that list. So within the div items here, we can create a new div with a class of item this time around. And inside this div, we can have the checkbox and of course the input field. So we can say here, input with a type of checkbox. Now the class here is going to simply be item-completed. So if the checkbox is checked, then the item is going to be completed. And a second input field here with a type of text, okay? And also a class of item-description. I'm also going to give this a placeholder to say something like to do item, just like that. So if I save this, go back in the browser, we have something like this. So now I want to pause right here, go inside the CSS and add that basic styling to make it look a little bit nicer. So we're going to be firstly targeting the class of item description up here. Going to be giving this a padding of 5 pixels. And of course, this right here refers to the input field itself where you type in the item. Let's also give this a width of 200 pixels and a margin bottom of 10 pixels. Okay. Hopping down here, let's also say item-completed : checked. So we're targeting the checkbox. When the checkbox is checked, so checked, we're then going to say plus to target the item description. So the plus here allows us to target a sibling in the HTML. So of course, the checkbox is here. The next sibling is the input field of type text. So we're targeting that one right there. So for the text box, we're going to give this a background of just a simple gray and a text decoration of line through. That way we know that that item is definitely checked off. Add button and give it a couple of styles. We can say padding APX top and bottom and 14px left and right. A font weight here of bold, a text color of white, and just for the background, we can just give this a 009578, that is the decode green color. A cursor of pointer as well is going to finish that one off. So if I save this, go back in the browser here, we've got this right here. If I was to type some text inside here, then check off the box, we can see we have that sibling selector making that thing dark gray with a line through it. So that is all we need for the CSS. Going back to the HTML, there is one change. We need to take this div with a class of item and instead put it inside a template element with a ID of item template. So I'll go inside here now, press Ctrl V and minimize the items div. So now we have this item inside the template. This means it is not going to be rendered on the page. If I go back in the browser, it's gone, but it is there in the background, and we're going to be using these templates to allow us to create these divs in the JavaScript code. So more on that later on, but just make sure you've got this template element right there. Cool. We are done with the HTML and the CSS. Let's move on to the main part of this video. That is going to be the JavaScript. So how do we do the JavaScript? Well, first step is going to be to get a reference to each one of those elements. So we can say here, const items container document.getElement by ID, okay, with an ID of items just like that, of course, referencing our ID of items right here. We can also say new line, item-template. This right here is going to be by ID, item template. So of course that right there is the template element which we just spoke about. I've also got the add, so we can say here add underscore button. This of course refers to the button with an ID of add. So now all three of our elements here, the items, the template, and the button, are referenced inside JavaScript. Okay? The next step is going to be to fetch the existing items from local storage. So the way it's going to work is, in fact, the way we achieve the refresh and the items still being there, so being saved, is through local storage, which of course is storage that is stored on the client-side browser. Okay, so in order to access that, we can have a function called getItems, and within this getItems function, it is going to look at local storage and get the items out if there are any items in there already. Okay, so if I go back in the example solution here, and I go into the application tab of the DevTools, go inside local storage here, we can see we have this key called to-do, and the value is a array of objects, and we have every single item here with a completed flag of true or false, and of course that is how our data is stored. So when the page first loads up, we want to actually get those items from local storage if it exists already. If not, we want to have an empty array instead. So let's go back inside this function here and get that value from local storage. We can say here const value equal to local storage.getItem and pass through here to do. Okay. Now, of course, to do refers to the key of the local storage key value pair. You can name this whatever you like, but I just want to say here console.log the value. Then I want to call getItems. I'll save this, go back in the browser here. I'll refresh, and we can see here we have the array of all of the items that I showed you previously. The reason why they appear here is because I'm on the same website and port number as the example. So localhost, port 5500. That's why it's appearing here. In your example, you actually get an empty or even just null. You actually get null or undefined in your case because, of course, you got no items there already. So in the case you got null or undefined, so I'll just change the key to be something like to-do-test instead, so something new, right? You should see null right here on your computer. To fix this, we can say or, then do empty array, okay? So now if I save this, go back in the browser, an empty array is there instead. So we have that fallback to default in case it's the first time your user is opening up the page. Cool. We can now just say, when you want to get the items, once we've got this JSON array out, we need to convert that JSON string into an actual JavaScript array. We can do so by simply saying return json.parse and pass in there that value. So of course value referring to the JSON array. Cool. And that is our get items. When the page first loads up, we can say let items equal to get items just like that. If I was to console.log the items, save this back in the browser, we get an empty array. And you should also get the exact same thing. I'm also going to keep my key to be to-do-test just so we don't see my existing items like we did earlier. Cool. That is our getItems function. the next function to define is going to be to set the items. So once the user has added an item or changed an item, we want to actually set the item back. So essentially, we want to refresh what we just saved. So here we can say function set items, pass in here the items array, just like that. And we can simply say here, look, const value or items JSON equal to JSON.stringify and pass through here the item. So taking the items array and converting it back into JSON. So now it can be saved against local storage. I can then say local storage.set item, this time, of course, set item, and passing through here to do -test, and then passing in the items JSON just like that. So we're resetting that JSON back. Okay, cool. And of course, we're going to be referencing the set items function multiple times throughout the code to make this thing work. Cool. We can now define the logic for adding a new item. We can say here, function add item, then within here, we can simply say items.unshift. So unshift means to add a new element to the beginning of the array. So essentially, when you press on add item, so this one right here, we want that new item to appear at the top. So using unshift lets us do that. And the default values within a new item is going to be a description of empty string and a completed status of false. That is your defaults. And of course, we're also representing our to-do items using a JavaScript object. Once an item has been added, just like this, we can say set items and pass in there those items. Now, optionally, you don't need to have the parameter to the set items. You can simply just reference the global variable if you wish to, but it might be best practice to actually take in that items array. Cool. So set items, of course, is going to save that new item to local storage. The next step is going to be to refresh the list once the item has been added. So what is this refresh list function? Let's add it in right now. So refresh list is going to take our list of items right up here. Then it is going to render that to the user. So function refresh list, okay? It is going to firstly sort the items. I want to leave this to the end because it can get a bit complex. So I'll say here to do sort items, okay? Let's hop down here and get to the main part of this rendering process. So whenever we make a change to the list, we add an item, we change an item, and so on, we want to actually clear the HTML right here. Clear it out and refresh it with the new data. Okay? We can do this by saying item container dot inner HTML is equal to an empty string. Then, once it's been cleared out, we can say for every single item inside the items list, we can do this. Okay? Const item element equal to item template dot contents dot clone node and pass in there true. So what's happening here? We're taking the template element, this template right here. We're then saying get the content from that template, so this one right here. Then we're saying let's clone or make a copy of this div. We're going to get that div back. So now we can simply interact with that div using standard DOM methods. We can say here const description input equal to item element dot query selector. Pass in here item dash description as the class. Remember to put in your dots at the beginning. So now item description refers to the input field right here, or the new input field, should I say, because we're cloning it, the new input field for the description. The same thing goes for checkbox. So checkbox or maybe completed input and pass in here item dash complete. So just remember in this case here that these inputs are new elements as we're cloning the template. So the template is literally just a template and we're making new copies of that thing. Okay. So for every single item, we're going to do that right there. Then we'll go down here. We're going to say description input.value is equal to item.description. So the value of that new input field is going to be the description on the item, which we saw came from right up here. So very shortly, we're going to be making this thing work properly. So we'll see some visual results here by having a description in. But for now, let's include that right there. Going to also say completed input.value equal to item.completed. Now, my mistake, this right here actually needs to be .checked instead. So .checked is the Boolean setter for checkboxes, and that right there is going to make it, checked or not checked, right? Now, last step here, I'm going to say item container .append child and append the item element. So we are almost done. Okay, we've got the list refreshing, we've got the add, the set, and the get. Let's just stop right here and tie everything together and give us some actual results. So right down at the bottom here, we're going to say refresh list, okay, and it's going to call that method and it's going to call that function, then refresh the list. I'll save this, go back in the browser, and we get nothing. That is a good thing because there's no errors, right? But let me show you something. If I go and I change the key here to be to do instead, so that was the previous one, and I go back in the browser, we get the list rendering. So I'm going to show you guys how to have some populated data right now. That's going to be done using the add item. So let's put this back to do-test, refresh, there we go, and make that add button work. So down here, we're going to say add button.add event listener. When the user clicks on the add button, we're going to simply say add item just like that. So call that add item function. It's going to save it and then refresh the list. Save this back in the browser, refresh, add item, and bang, there you go. So if we check local storage now in the application tab, we can see we have the to do right there, or sorry, my mistake, to do-test, yours might be just to do. But we can see here in to do-test, we have the data being populated. If I press add again, we can see we get a second entry right there. So how do we now make it so when we enter some data in the input field, how do we make it save? Very straightforward, guys. Let's define a new function called update item. It's going to take through an item as well as the key you wish to update and the value you wish to set that key to. In this case here, the key is either going to be description or completed. So we'll say here item, then we can say key is equal to the value. So simply set the key on that item to be the value that you pass in. Once that's been set, we're going to say set items, then pass through items, then simply refresh the list, much like the add item just above here. Okay. And also keep in mind that the reason why this here works and we don't need to access the items array directly is because in JavaScript, objects are passed by reference. So updating the item here is also going to update the same object in the list already. So we can simply call set items like that and we should be fine. So now we've got this function defined. Let's actually use it. Let's hop down here and say description input.add event listener. When the user changes the description input, so they make some changes to the actual text box itself, I'm going to simply say update item, pass through here the item, which comes from up here in the loop, right? Then say as a value, the key, it's going to be description. And the value for that is going to be description input dot value. Then the exact same thing for the completed input. Copy this, paste it right there, completed input dot checked instead, as well as a key of completed. So completed and checked are two different things. I did definitely make that mistake when I was doing the sample for this video, but anyway, make sure you have your completed and your checked in the right position. So now when you change that data, it is going to update it, save it to the local storage, then refresh the list. Save this back in the browser. If I was to now say something like, hello, right? We can see here in local storage, it is going to save that data right there. If I check it off, bang, it is also going to save it, completed, equal to true. Refresh the page, and it's going to stay there. So you get that remembrance of whatever data that you inserted. Now, the last step for this is going to be sorting those items, because when you check an item, you want that to be on the bottom instead of the top or wherever it was in the list. So back to this example here, we can see if I was to uncheck this, it is going to return to the top. I'll check it and it goes on the bottom. So to do that, we can do some simple sorting within JavaScript. So up in the refresh list, we're going to say items.sort, then take in the standard A and B so we can compare the A and B items. So of course, A and B refer to items inside the list as we're looping through the sorting algorithm. Cool. So we can say here, if A is completed, we're going to return 1, push it to the bottom of the list, okay? If B is completed, -1. So the opposite of that, right? Then we can say return A.description is less than B.description, then -1, otherwise 1, and this here is going to simply sort the list alphabetically. So this makes it so that your things starting with A are at the top and things starting with Z are on the bottom. So this simple sorting algorithm here is going to prioritize your check boxes and of course fall back to being description or the actual spelling of that item. Save this back in the browser and we are done. If I was to add a thing starting with Apple, or A should I say, I'll make one starting with B like that. It goes to the second item here, so we get that alphabetical order. If I was to check the apple, it goes down below, and that prioritization there works. So that is how to build a simple to-do list using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Hope this video today helped you out. If it did, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.